I'm JG Michael, and this is Parallax Views. Hey there, Parallax Views listeners. On this edition of the program, we'll be hearing from returning guest Ambassador Patrick Theros, who likely needs no introduction for longtime listeners of the program, but he is a diplomat with a great deal of experience in the Middle East, and he'll be bringing his expertise to this conversation about the Iran war, or what could be called the Iran war catastrophe. But before we get to that conversation, I need to remind you that it is you, the listener, along with my one and only sponsor, Mike Swanson, that make this show possible. So please consider supporting me on Patreon at patreon.com/parallaxviews. One more time, that's patreon.com/parallaxviews. Also, check out the website of my sponsor, Mike Swanson, at wallstreetwindow.com. You will get the best financial and trading news there. I have actually had listeners make a return on investment thanks to Mike's trading tips, so I highly recommend Wall Street Window. And I believe if you sign up, you can still get a copy of Mike's ebook free of charge, The Twofold Formula, the single best trading pattern I've ever used. Once again, that's wallstreetwindow.com. And with that being said, let's get right to it with Ambassador Patrick Theros. Welcome back to Parallax Views. One of my favorite guests, Ambassador Patrick Theros, who writes for the Greek-American publication, The National Herald. How are you doing?
So far, so good. Day's still young. It'll all go wrong.
So I want to talk about this as someone who is an experienced diplomat. I know that you were one of the people, just from my contact with you, that was very upset when this war broke out. What does this mean to you, what is happening right now, given your history in diplomacy?
Well, the best article I've read so far compares us to, it begins America's Sicilian moment. It comes out of some professor's Substack, but it traces what happened to Athens in the 4th century BC when they decided to go after a sideshow and committed their army and their navy to this sideshow of knocking out one of Sparta's allies, Syracuse in Sicily, and it went horribly, horribly wrong. And I mean, and it was sort of the principal reason that in the end Sparta won the Peloponnesian Wars and defeated Athens. I know you can draw a historical analogy. You can stretch it out too far, but I recommend people read this. I'm going to send it to you, by the way, afterwards. There is an analogy. What in God's name are we doing? This country did not threaten us. Presented no serious threat to the United States within the next couple of decades. And who knows what happens in a couple of decades? The Ayatollahs all die. They get converted. Who knows? And there was no proximate reason for war, and I have no idea I have some ideas as to what prompted our president to do that. But what really surprised me is it goes against everything he did. So what's going on in his mind? And from a military point of view, this is an unwinnable war. All the Iranians have to do to win is be the last man standing.
It's a matter of they just have to survive.
Exactly.
Now, can you talk about this from your perspective as someone who was you were the U.S. ambassador to Qatar from 95 to 98. You have a very strong interest in the Middle East. And I know when this first broke out, you just said, oh my God, it's all turning to crap.
Yeah.
Can you explain just your closeness to this situation as someone who has been a diplomat involved in Middle East affairs?
Can I explain the this war or the whole thing?
Well, just what this means and why it sort of I guess needles at you that this is happening.
Right. The What this means is that we have just been plunged into an unwinnable war in an area of the world that is key to maintaining the world's economy. And we are going to pay for it. It is going to cost us enormously, and it's unwinnable because we want. Yeah, people talk about what we did in Germany and Japan after World War II. We conquered it, we took them over, but they all involved an awful lot of American soldiers on their soil, and particularly in Germany, an awful lot of American soldiers getting killed, and Russian soldiers and others. Uh, you can't surrender to an airplane. So, leaving aside the morality of the war, leaving aside the lack of objectives, I still don't. Trump has run through virtually an encyclopedia of objectives as to what he wanted to do, none of which make any sense in justifying this war. And it's going, uh, he doesn't want to send troops in because he knows that putting any troops on the ground is going to have casualties. Casualties kill the midterms for the Republicans, but so do gasoline prices. He, I can't imagine. I'm at a loss to imagine what he thought. Not I'm at a loss to imagine what he thought, but this is pretty wild. I believe that he got talked into this war by Benjamin Netanyahu, who played on, man, you pulled off Venezuela. Look how easy that was. You kidnapped their president. Now you're turning the Venezuela into sort of a vassal satellite of the United States, and you could do the same thing in Iran. And he believed it. I, the wasn't there. This is, I think, also the problem. Was there anybody around him who had the nerve to tell him, Mr. President, I don't think this is such a good idea? Excuse me. So, where do we stand right now? We have taken roughly a fifth of the world's supply of oil and a fifth of the world's supply of natural gas off the market. There are some small alternatives. We can probably reroute about a fifth of the fifth, so to speak, of the oil into the market. But the only countries that have excess capacity to produce more oil in meaningful ways are the same countries that are now blocked from getting their oil out from the Straits of Hormuz. Right now, the only two countries that have really large capacity to export additional quantities of oil are Saudi Arabia and Iran. And they're the ones who can't come out because Iran can. The next thing I expect to see happen is that Trump will allow the Iranians to ship more oil through the Straits of Hormuz while they're blocking them for everybody else. He's just done it for the Russians. He just gifted Putin $150 billion, which is the difference between what they were going to get for the oil that was already at sea and the price that they are probably going to get now, according to a lot of experts. So I'm sort of rambling because this situation just leads to rambling. It goes on the mistake of starting this war and thinking that you can win it, you can kidnap kill their leader, and the Iranians will surrender overnight. You don't have to bomb them very much. The very concept that this could happen in a country like Iran, given its history, given its size, given the how can I say, the entrenched apparatus that the mullahs set up to run the country.
Not just that, but also just this idea that you can bomb a country into regime change.
Surrendering. Yeah.
Yeah, because I don't know if you know Robert Pape, but he wrote a book called The Smart Bomb Trap. He's been doing a lot of the media rounds. He just says it doesn't work.
Yeah. You can't surrender to an airplane. I don't remember the last time they did. Anyone did. And you can't surrender to somebody that you've just killed.
So that gets into, we were talking about this off air, but Israel is making a lot of hay out of allegedly killing the Iranian intelligence minister, and you had some thoughts on that.
Yes, my thoughts are that this is a deliberate attempt to prevent negotiations. Ali Larijani, not a very nice guy, but he's smart. He's pragmatic. He has tried to deal with people on the outside. He supported more moderate presidents of Iran in the past. Uh, he is a guy who will do what need, God rest his soul, who would have done what would have been needed. He was a guy you can deal with. Khamenei, Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader who was killed, was not a guy you could deal with easily. Larijani was, and all of a sudden he's dead, and it's as if we are our friends are trying to kill anybody who could reach out and start negotiating with us, anybody who could have a rational discussion with us. And then you have to start asking some question. Either our friends are a bunch of psychopaths who just enjoy killing headliners, or there is some reason behind it. And my belief is the reason behind it is they don't want negotiations. They want a war to continue that is paid for by the United States of America.
Can you talk a little bit about, I mean, this may sound like a dumb question, but why would Israel want this war?
Again, we get back to sort of basics. Benjamin Netanyahu has been indicted for a series of relatively small crimes, taking gifts as political bribery. He has been fighting the case. He's basically tried to change the judges on the Supreme Court. He's tried all sorts of things to avoid getting into court, which to me indicates that he doesn't have a very good defense when the trial starts. And that would end up with him out of office and potentially in jail. And he wants to stay prime minister because it prevents the system from actually bringing him to trial.
In that sense, is this even more, would it be more accurate to say it's Netanyahu wants this war even more than Israel?
I don't think, I think right now is the Israelis have been numbed into thinking that, wow, we're on a roll. So there probably is a very large number, even a majority of Israelis, who may actually applaud this war and we're killing these people. And you get on a roll, and once you get on a roll, it's like a football game where your team is winning, and you really don't care too much about anything except just watching the game. And I think that is what has happened in Israel right now. Netanyahu, he clearly wants this war to continue. It is not costing it's costing the Israelis minor stuff. He can tell them that, the odd missile that gets through the defenses, yeah, it's a fair price to pay for knocking out our biggest enemy. But there hasn't been a major cost. Mind you, the day that an Iranian missile slips through the defenses and takes out an important target will be the day that one can change the topic of conversation with them. But until then, it hasn't happened.
Now, one of the things, and I don't know if this has changed since I've woken up today, but, U.S. allies have essentially refused to help Donald Trump secure shipping through the strategic Strait of Hormuz, both European and Asian allies. What do you make of this? And are they actually being reasonable, not wanting to get involved in this?
Well, there's sort of practical reasons, and there's the political reason. They didn't start this war. They were not involved in this war. They told us that this war was a mistake. And now it sounds very much like Trump wants to stop using the American Navy and start using foreign navies to do a job that's not doable. And then from the practical point of view, I can't think, including our own admirals, we're not prepared to do this. You really don't want to put $1 billion destroyers and $500,000 frigates into these narrow waters at 90 kilometers. The Strait of Hormuz is roughly 90 kilometers long, and its narrowest point, it's about 30 kilometers. And you're putting very, very expensive and somewhat fragile, because of all the super new equipment that you put on him, ships within range of relatively simple missiles, but within really close range. If you can do some arithmetic, an anti-ship missile, the old kinds of anti-ship missiles, travel at about 250 meters per second. And do the arithmetic, and you're only about 3 or 4 minutes out from when that missile is gonna get to you. And if they fire 4 or 5 of them, and you don't see them coming until you've got 2 or 3 minutes left to engage them, the chances that one of them is going to get through and hit a ship are reasonably high. And I don't know any navy that really wants to risk their ships. The Greeks just bought from the French. They had built in France a jointly designed frigate that is probably, for its size and weight, the best armed frigate in the world. And they're not going to put it there. They're going to put the first frigate coming off the shipyard was $900 million. Hopefully, they're going to get the price down to the following ones. But why would I, if I were the prime minister of any European country, why would I risk my ships when it is very clear that the U.S. Navy is not prepared to risk their ships?
Real quick, I wanted to add. Well, we'll go on. Were you going to get into the political aspect of this, or?
Yeah, the political aspects of this are Iran has made some enemies by bombing trying to go, they said, going after American interests in the Gulf states. And given the inaccuracy of some of the weapons they have, where you can spoof them so that they don't hit the target, they hit some building down the street. Given all that, yeah, the Gulf states are going to be very resentful of the Iranians. But when it is all over, geography hasn't changed. They're still going to have to live with the Iranians. The bulk of Dubai's trade is with Iran. Kuwait sits, for all practical purposes, 20 kilometers from Iran. The Qataris share the world's biggest, how can I say, lake of natural gas. Sits in the waters between the two countries, and a good chunk of that lake sits inside the Iranian economic zone. Bahrain's 80% Shia. All these countries have dealt with Iran in the past, sometimes quite profitably. All of them know that Iran is across the water, and when this is over, the Americans are going to go away, and the Israelis are going to go away, and they're going to be left sitting there dealing with the Iranians. So for them, this is something they don't want. They did not want this war to happen. There's a few people going around saying that, well, it was the Saudis were pushing us to attack.
Can I add to that real quick? Because I've been very frustrated about that line that people have been pushing, because that came out of, real quick, that came out of the Washington Post, and people are just taking it at face value. The Washington Post just fired its Middle East desk under Jeff Bezos. I'm sorry, but I'm taking that with a grain of salt because of that.
Yeah, I think it's a setup. It first appeared in the Wall Street Journal, I think, and
the Wall Street Post.
No, but before then there was
okay.
It appeared I thought it appeared in the Wall Street Journal before it appeared in the Washington Post. Regardless, that's a plant. That's misinformation if there ever was any. I'm going to turn in my profit, turn in my foreign service membership card if the Saudis were really pushing the Americans to attack Iran. This is disinformation of the first order. I simply don't believe it. I've seen a report today, and again, I think it was Wall Street Journal, in which they said that the Gulf states are saying to the Americans, "Well, we don't want you to leave and stop attacking Iran until you've crippled Iran." What does crippled Iran mean? Yeah, you're going to cripple this country of 90 million to 100 million people that sits 40 kilometers away from you? I don't. And it's going to stay crippled, and it's going to remember that you were the one who was telling the Americans to cripple them before they leave. Seriously? There's no logic to this. If anybody, except you've seen too many Rambo movies.
You know what's interesting? Speaking of Rambo movies and people that don't know their history and only base it off Rambo movies,
Yeah.
the Trump administration yesterday vowed to escort oil tankers through the Strait of Hormuz. This is coming from CBS News. My first thought was 1987, the Bridgeton incident.
Yeah.
Can't this, I mean, maybe you can explain history for people because this hasn't worked in the past.
Yeah. I recommend people see Wagging the Dog, an old movie that was a really great movie on this one.
Oh, yeah, Wag the Dog, the De Niro movie.
Wag the Dog, yeah. But if you in the 1980s, Iraq attacked Iran. There was a disruption in oil coming out of the Gulf. And this was the disruption in which both sides were attacking the tankers of the other side. And since nobody knew who tankers were, there were a lot of hits. And we had a destroyer, and I think it was a British. I couldn't remember. It reminded me that was actually hit by a couple of missiles fired by an Iraqi airplane that couldn't see what it was shooting at. And the ship almost sank, seriously damaged. People died. And our destroyer was actually in the process of escorting tankers that were bringing Iraqi and Kuwaiti oil out. Not basically, it was blue on blue. It was the Iraqis hitting a destroyer that was helping them, in effect. Given modern weapons, once launched, a number of them have a real tendency to pick the wrong target. And I would be surprised to see American ships escorting tankers through the Strait of Hormuz. If ordered to, they will, but there's got to be some admiral saying to Trump, you really don't want to do this. Because the minute just one ship gets hit, you don't have to sink it. Just one ship gets hit. Modern ships are designed to avoid being hit, not to surviving the hit. Because they're relatively fragile. They're packed full of equipment. They don't have armor plate anymore because the armor plate would weigh too much on these ships. So some ship is going to get hit. The law of it's the roll of the dice, and in this case, the dice are loaded against the ships. The only way you can secure the Strait of Hormuz is to occupy the land, that part of Iran that faces it, and that's 90 kilometers of mountain. And I don't know, 2-3 divisions of the United States Army would be required to hold it against the Iranians. Again, I find that news. Trump may have said it, or then again, he may have sort of hinted at saying, I'm thinking of, why should I send? And within the next few hours, he could actually talk his way out of it. I pray to God that he didn't actually order the Navy to do that against their wishes.
In regards to the Strait of
Hormuz,
American
ship, once you hit an American ship, what do you do? Now, if you're Ronald Reagan, and you take a really big hit, you swallow it and leave. When the Marine barracks were attacked in 1982, killed over 300 Marines in Beirut. Instead of doubling down and reinforcing and going after the people who'd loaded the truck bomb that drove into the barracks, rather than do that, Ronald Reagan just pulled the entire U.S. force out of Lebanon. He was not going to add to his losses. And so I don't know what hitting a destroyer would do, but even if it caused Trump to pull out and declare victory and go home, you still got to have a whole bunch of dead American kids.
In terms of the economic issues that come with this, can we talk about the Strait of Hormuz? Because I had someone, and I don't know if you would consider this exaggeration, but I had someone tell me recently Iran has a gun to the head of the global economy through the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. It's not. It's a gun loaded with something that'll cripple, that'll say blind you or deafen you. It won't necessarily kill you, but it really can do a great deal of damage. The basic story is this: 20% of the world's oil consumption, around 22 million barrels a day, normally flows out of the through the Strait of Hormuz, out of the Persian Gulf, into the world market, mostly going east. That's roughly 300 ships a day go through the Strait of Hormuz. At the same time, 20% of the world's consumption of natural gas in the form of liquefied natural gas comes through the straits, almost all of it from Qatar, comes through the Strait of Hormuz, again, mostly going east. Qatar competes with us as being the single biggest exporter of natural gas. The Qataris shut down they had a second reason for shutting down their plant, which was that an Iranian drone got into their LNG facility, which is huge. It's about, I think it's about 30 square kilometers, something like that. Got into and did some damage, and the Qataris immediately just shut down the entire facility and stopped producing LNG. To turn the valves on the pipes that were going down to get the gas out of the ground, and it's a very good reason. Unlike refineries, which mostly burn, if you have a situation where there's a certain amount of gas just floating in the air with a lot of oxygen, that turns into an explosion. You could do some really serious damage. The caution, the security measures the Qataris take in safeguarding that from accidental sparks, that whole area, are enormous.
Now, I also wanted to ask you about Rubio's comments, where he said the U.S. struck first in effect to manage escalation because Israel was about to initiate. Can you talk a little bit about why that stood out to you?
Yeah, because first of all, it made no sense. It made no sense because the United States can turn Israel off anytime it wants. We've done it before. Trump calls Netanyahu and tells him no. And Israel won't strike, just like Netanyahu stopped shooting on a couple of occasions when the American president told him stop shooting. He then figured out a way to start shooting again. It's in Gaza. But as long as just having the American president call Netanyahu and in a rough voice say, no, you won't do it. You remember that after the Israelis tried to kill the Hamas negotiating team in Qatar, in Doha, with an airstrike or some sort of rocket strike, the president called Netanyahu in and humiliated him, made him call the Qataris with him. If you remember that picture in the scene where Netanyahu's got the handset, and Trump is holding the rest of the phone, and he's just given Netanyahu the script to humiliate himself and apologize for the attack. And then you tell me that we can't turn off an Israeli attack on Iran? Are you kidding me? That one struck me as absolutely incredible. And I think by nightfall, Trump understood that it sounded incredible, that it sounded like something that could not possibly have happened and would have made him look weak, that he couldn't turn it off. So so that evening, he says, well, we decided to strike and we took Israel with us, which is possible, is plausible. I don't believe it. But I don't believe it for deeper reasons. I don't believe that Trump on his own would have decided that there was a reason to strike Iran. And also, we weren't terribly well prepared to strike Iran. The second carrier was on its way. It hadn't gotten there yet. We still didn't have the right to overfly all the Gulf countries. And we were counting on the Israelis to do the dirty work for us, which means that the Israelis had already agreed, or, in my opinion, thought it up in the first place.
Is this arguably bad for both the U.S. and even Israel in the long run?
It is terrible for the U.S. The amount of bad for the U.S. depends on how soon we get out of it. Almost everybody who has any sense of what's going on there is telling Trump to declare victory. You know, I've destroyed this and this and this, give a long list of everything we've destroyed, and then declare victory and go home. That is probably the best advice Trump is getting at the moment. The longer we stay in, the longer we will see that the bombing is not doing anything, and the pressure will then mount on Trump to go for broke, dig the hole he's in and just dig it deeper by committing ground troops, because nothing else at this point can possibly change we've hit stability, we've hit equilibrium with the Iranians. We can't do that much more damage to them, or we can't do enough damage to them to change their minds. And every day that we're delayed, the economy of the world takes a little bit, goes a little bit further down, and a little bit further down, and it is we are running through anti-air missiles, the anti-missile defense missiles that we need. We're running through them like mad, and we're running through our strategic reserves, I believe. And all we need now is for China to go make some threatening moves in the South China Sea or around Taiwan, and he's going to be forced with, where do I keep my aircraft carriers? Do I keep, a third of them off Iran, and then I send all the rest that we got to the South China Sea? This is really difficult for us. And then I don't understand the stock market. I remain convinced the stock market is run by idiots. There's no stock market right now should be going down much more deeply than it has. And it's every time Trump says something positive, the market goes down. Every time he says something, negative, the market goes down. Positive, the market recovers. The market shouldn't be reacting to public statements or statements on X by the President of the United States. They should be reacting to real realities. For oil, we are in the same market as the rest of the world. If you don't, take out the shipping costs, and we're paying for oil almost exactly, for our domestic oil, we're paying almost exactly the same amount of money that, say, France is paying for imported oil, because the price of oil is worldwide. we're a little bit better off when it comes to natural gas, because natural gas in the United States is distributed domestically by pipeline. The price there is going to go up, but it's not going to go up as dramatically as with oil, because we have physical limits to how much gas we can export. We have physical limits as to how much oil we can produce in a short time, how much we can increase, but we have we have the capacity to ship oil. That's, oil is supposed to go to Pittsburgh. We have the capacity to divert it and send it to Paris. And so that's why the oil price in the States is going up as much as it is elsewhere. I don't know the point at which the cost of a gallon of gasoline at an American pump will get Trump's attention. I think he's got his attention, and but the wrong people are feeding him information. Anything he thinks up, he's got a crowd around him that claps their hands and say, "Hey, boss, that's a brilliant idea."
In that regard, I was going to ask you, what do you make of I know he's controversial, but I think it's telling that Joe Kent, the director of the National Counterterrorism Center, resigned. His wife died in an ISIS bombing, and he's
Yeah.
just like, Iran did not pose any immediate threat. Now, I know people have issues with Kent, but I could see more of these resignations happening potentially.
Yeah, it goes against everything that Trump promised them. And to me, I never thought I would be rooting for Tucker Carlson and Marjorie Taylor Greene. I mean, it's, every time I look at them and I'm saying, yeah, I'm agreeing with you. And a second later, I'm asking myself, what are you doing? These are people that you were, putting pins into their voodoo dolls just a few weeks ago. So it is interesting to me that the far fringe of the MAGA movement took him literally, that there would be no more foreign adventures, that we wouldn't have another forever war in the Middle East. And what we're looking at is either we pull out now, or in not too distant future, it turns into a forever war that we can't get out of. And this is what was promised to MAGA. And the far right of MAGA were the ones who took them most seriously. They not only don't want immigrants, they don't want us out there getting involved with any foreigners. They're the ones who really believe in America can take care of itself and we let the rest of the world go to hell. So, yeah, I'm just waving my hands in the air. That's all. I'm sorry.
Yeah, because it's such a someone described me as like we're living in the Twilight Zone.
I know. I just don't believe it. I literally wake up every morning. I'm one of the last people who getting a print copy of the Washington Post every morning, because I like reading a newspaper. I'm canceling that at the end of this month because they've just jacked the price up to something like the difference between the print and the online version is around $500 a year.
You
And
know, it's funny
yeah,
because I also wanted to ask you, you have the Tucker Carlson, Marjorie Taylor Greene types on one end saying
mhm,
this is a stupid war. I've also seen, of all people, that some of the Bush era neocons think this is a very bad idea. The sort
yeah.
of Robert Kagan's. What do you make of that?
Uh, they've seen the light. It is a bad idea. There's a couple. Doug Feith, who had disappeared for a little while. He was one of
Has
the.
Doug Fife made any comments?
Yeah, he's in favor. He's in favor of doing everything, including dropping the 82nd Airborne. He's probably an unreformed neocon.
I'm
But
assuming Elliot Abrams is probably cheering this on too, but
the vast majority are people who had this how can I say soul searing experience. Uh, and realize that the reason that they are no longer running the political show in Washington is because imposing democracy at the point of an American bayonet is not a very good idea.
Now, that brings me to my next question. I have a lot of anger towards the Bush administration era and
Yes.
the neoconservatives. I am finally willing now to say that I think this is worse than even what they did with the Iraq War.
Yeah, because at least they had a plan. It wasn't the right plan. And they made a mistake, but at least they thought about it. And the first stage went beautifully. They just didn't have a second stage plan. But
Well, with this one, we don't even have an exit strategy.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. We didn't have an entry strategy, and we clearly don't have an exit strategy. What is it that he's trying to accomplish? Is it regime change? Well, what does regime change mean? Are you going to go in, occupy Tehran, call in the Majlis, call in the mullahs and tell them you're all going to resign and leave? I have no idea what it meant by regime change. Destroying all these things on the ground, yeah, you can destroy them, but unless you're prepared to keep, like we did with the Iraqis over a much smaller territory, unless you're prepared to exercise a no-fly zone over the whole of Iran, which, if you take out Texas, is about as big as the old Confederacy put together, and you're going to keep a no-fly zone. You're going to keep American airplanes flying 24/7, and every time they see something like someone's building a missile, they're going to go bomb it. And you're going to keep that up forever?
If you could, I want to quote a line from your most recent piece in the National Herald. Iran is not a fragile petrostate collapsing under sanctions and isolation. It is a revolutionary system with layered institutions, hardened security structures, a population of nearly 90 million, and a 3,000-year civilizational identity. Now,
Right.
you said this in response to this idea that they can just win through decapitation. Maybe you
Right.
can explain what you mean more by how this is not a fragile petrostate, and it is a revolutionary system with layered institutions and a hardened security structure. Can you speak to that and explain that more to people who may not be familiar with Iran?
Okay. Iran exports oil. It is a big exporter of oil. In the days when it was properly run, oil was not the, it may have been the single biggest export item, but it wasn't, 50, 60, 70% of the economy like it is across the Gulf and countries like that. It had agriculture. It has had an industrial base. It is a center for trade. It had good universities producing a lot of very smart nuclear scientists, apparently. But it was a, before the mullahs took over, it was a functioning dictatorship, which means it functions less efficiently than a democracy, but it was functioning. The mullahs came in, they took over the intelligence services of the Shah and went them one further. They they basically have co-opted every part of the country. Every part of the country has got at least one Ayatollah, and he's part of the system. So they've got people who are integrated into the system, from the guy at the bottom, the beat cop, all the way up to the supreme leader. These people are all integrated into a system that is probably directly employing a quarter of the country. And then secondly, Iran has never had a serious, or not never, that's a long time, but the last time an ethnic group seriously tried to revolt and break away from Iran was over 100 years ago. And the Iranians have done a good job of integrating at least the leadership, co-opting the leadership of all the ethnic groups that they belong to into the system. And the system is a system. It is not this dictator got there and he's just got this narrow circle around him. You're seeing every time the Israelis or we kill somebody, the next day his replacement steps up.
Is this system more decentralized in a way than people give it credit for?
It's a system that is everywhere. It is centralized. It is the way somebody describes the use of air forces, centralized in the mission and decentralized in the location.
What do you mean by that, decentralized in the location?
In other words, there are power centers that report directly to the center, but they're not located in the center where they have no independent authority. Essentially, the center says to them, "You're in charge of Khuzestan, and this is what I expect from you." But after that, that's the guy who's in charge of Khuzestan, and all of the towns and villages of Khuzestan have got layers of people that report upward. But a lot of decision making is taking place, as it has over the last thousands of years, is taking place in the different cities. Iran is a collection of cities that are very proud and independent of who they are. Shirazi does not believe that somebody in Tehran is a better cook than he is. These are all people have their they have their identity. They have the fact that the overwhelming majority of Iranians are Shia, even including among the Kurds. So this gives the mullahs a certain, how can I say, cachet in the entire country. And they are proud of being Iranians. They are proud of being part of this multi-ethnic, the last multi-ethnic empire that still survives. Because it is a country, it is probably the only Muslim country where the history is at least as important as the religion in defining who they are. So they've never started a war, by the way. In 500 years, Iran has never started a war. They've always, other people have started wars. Now, somebody will say, did they start this war? If you assume that there was absolute peace last year and everybody was in contact and everything was copacetic and no one had any enemies, and then the Iranians attacked out of the blue, yeah, they started, but that's a fake assumption. There has been this war going on in the region in which Iran both changed sides, in effect, in 1979 from supporting Israel to not supporting Israel. The mullahs used what the Israel occupation of Palestine and so forth as a tool to build their power domestically. So you can blame them for that. But the fact remains that they didn't start this war.
And also, I would add to that, I mean, the big issue for me has always been it wasn't Iran that left the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. It was the
Absolutely.
US that left it.
Yeah.
And regardless of what one thinks of Iran's domestic policies, the Islamic Republic, and how it treats protesters or anything else within its domestic sphere, I actually think it's been pretty rational in terms of how it's dealt with its own international relations.
Yeah, it's tried. Yeah, it has. It's made mistakes, but it has been rational. Has clearly been rational. The now how can I say this? I think they didn't have control over what we call proxies. They aren't proxies. These are independent organizations like Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen. These are independent organizations that existed before the Iranians were there.
The Islamic Republic just lends support to them.
Sorry, and then said, okay, these guys sort of agree with us. They're Shia. They have missions we can support, so we support their mission. And I don't think the Iranians ordered Hezbollah to do anything. I think there are a lot of people in Hezbollah wrongly who felt this obligation to go support Iran this second time around. Now the recent one, and hit the Israelis when they should have stayed quiet. Even Hamas has been pushing Hezbollah has been pushing the Iranians to tell Hezbollah to call it off. So they're not proxies. The Houthis are sitting there saying, we don't need to do anything anymore. The Iranians are doing what we might have been willing to do, but the Houthis weren't really interested in cutting off shipping into the Red Sea. They felt that there was such anger among their people over Palestine, they had to do something. And the something was shoot at ships, ostensibly only ships heading for Israel, although they didn't have a good classification system. So they shot at other ships as well.
Do you- would you mind if we go a little bit longer? I had a few more questions.
Okay, what time is it? Yeah, I got it, but okay, a little bit. Sure, go ahead.
Okay. I wanted to ask you what you make of I have people that will say to me, well, I listen to, these Persian or Iranian diaspora voices in California, and they say, and I'm like, at this point, I don't care what diaspora voices say in California, and I think they're extremely biased, and I don't think their experience is the same as people being bombed in Iran right now. I'm curious what you make of this disconnect.
It's what happens to virtually every diaspora that fled an oppressed government. And even if they left before then, they're affected by the new people coming out of the country. If you're living comfortably in California, as an Iranian, you have, first of all, you have your feelings towards your home country, and you probably have relatives back there who are saying how difficult life is,
And you probably
that,
have grievances, yeah.
and have legitimate grievances. And all they know are the legitimate grievances. They are not affected so much by by what the U.S. and Israel are doing. For them, it's like the Cuban exiles in Florida. What they want is the overthrow of Castro and to go back and throw Castro out. And I want to take over my farm that I was nationalized by the communists 70 years ago, and bring the peasants all back to work on my farm, and I want to be rich again, smoke good cigars. This is unfortunately what a lot of diaspora Iranians, Cubans, and others want to go back to. I think there are a lot of Iranians who, the first day around, when they heard that Khamenei was dead, cheered quietly. They are unhappy with the regime. They're unhappy with the regime because it can't provide for them anymore, because so much the regime is incompetent, because Khamenei was so focused on all the wrong things that he neglected 40 years of investment that should have
What
gone in.
what were the wrong things he was focused on, just as a
I mean,
sidebar?
well, probably the single biggest thing that's affected people was that the Iranian water distribution system in the country had no investments in it for 40 or 50 years. So as it's like what has happened a little bit with the Colorado River. If you don't, dams silt up, pipes corrode, all those things happen. If you're running around just trying to fix one thing or another, you can't. You will ultimately lose to Mother Nature. You've got to go back and put real investment into getting the systems up to working as well. Plus, now you have farmers couldn't get water off the irrigation, so they're putting wells down and reducing the water table even higher. There's been a bit of a drought, pretty serious drought in Iran over several years, just like what happened in California. And the government reacted incompetently. And when you have a lot of corruption in the government, as I believe exists in Iran, but that's the people on the outside always, when there is an oppressive government at home, always call for things that the people at home might have thinks are nice, but they really don't want bombs like these, the school kids. They really don't want bombs falling on their homes.
Well, this is the type of thing that leads to rallying around the flag because when you have
Yeah,
150 schoolgirls dead, you know who
yeah,
you're going to look out for. Well, I guess I have to back the government in this case over the people bombing me.
yeah. And we fell into this trap with Chalabi, the neocons. There was a guy named Ahmed Chalabi who I knew when I was in Jordan and was a con man. He basically swindled, he basically bankrupted the biggest bank in Jordan and then came out here and presented himself to the neocons as somebody who, he was leading the opposition to Saddam Hussein and he conned everybody. And I tell you, I met him, I knew him a little bit, and he was a con man of the first water.
What was that experience like meeting
Well,
Schlatt?
that, well, initially uh, I just thought that he was a successful banker. We were at dinner with a bunch at the ambassador's house, and we sat at his table. And my wife, who gets better vibes than I do, came home and said, "I don't like that guy," and she was absolutely right. But what we expected, and even though the State Department and the CIA told everybody that he's a con man, he's a fake, the neocon leadership they didn't listen. And they even flew him in with several hundred armed men after the invasion was over, expecting thousands of people to stream out into the streets to welcome the Messiah. And no, it never happened. As a matter of fact, most people didn't want him around. And we kept them there. We kept trying to make him important in Iraq, and it failed miserably. And he had stirred up the Iraqi diaspora, which was his total strength was in the Iraqi diaspora, and even there it wasn't very strong. And I don't think that there are that many. I don't think there are any Iranians, any significant number of Iranians who'd like to see the Shah's kid come back inside
Oh,
Iran.
Pahlavi. Yeah.
Outside Iran, there are probably people who left when Shah Reza Pahlavi was in his glory, and they probably remember him with, you know, when you remember something that happened 50 years ago, the bad things tend to disappear, and you only remember the good things.
This is actually a good lead into the other question I had, which is do you see any, I know we said this is different than Iraq because at least there was a game plan, but do you see any other parallels to Iraq that we can learn from with this current conflict?
If we, yeah, just it's the get out. The
It's don't
and
let hubris keep you going.
yeah, exactly. No, and you don't draw resources from other important projects. One of the reasons that Afghanistan went bad was just as we were getting into the reform and rebuilding of Afghanistan. It might have worked. It might have worked, might not have worked, but at least we had a plan that was put together to reform and rebuilding Afghanistan. And then Iraq happened, and we pulled out almost all the resources that we had in Afghanistan. And it never recovered. Our effort in Afghanistan never recovered. And we spent the next 20 years being shot at by the Taliban. And I think this was part of why Obama wanted out of Afghanistan, out of Iraq, particularly out of Afghanistan. And to give credit to a guy to whom I not give a lot of credit, I think Biden, when he was still had complete control of his mind,
Faculties, yeah.
and his faculties, when he had complete control of his faculties, he wanted out of Afghanistan and Iraq. And what happened is he wanted out of it so bad that when he became president, he just pulled out and without any plan or planning, he just ordered everybody out of Afghanistan, and then that disaster happened. But
I
I
hope
think
that
that was a function he was no longer in complete control of his faculties.
I hope this doesn't sound strange, but I almost feel like Trump looks at the Obama era and what we did with Libya, you know,
Mhm.
yeah, so Gaddafi getting offed and says, we should do that because, we didn't put any boots on the ground. But that didn't end well either.
No, I know. Or maybe I think he was talked into believing that it would end well. And in the end, he's a real estate developer from Queens, and that was his life. And then he became a reality show.
Well, that's even how he talks about Gaza. He talks about it like it's a real estate issue to be solved.
Yeah, exactly. And then he sends Witkoff and Kushner without a single foreign service officer, diplomat with any knowledge about any of the subjects to be discussed with him to negotiate with the Iranians.
Now, before we close out, I have to ask you, you've been dealing with the Middle East, not just Iran, more like the bigger picture is what I want to get at. And I know you and your colleagues have said, "Oh my God, you've watched this happen, and it's just
Right.
turning everything you've worked for into just a pile of crap." I think one of your colleagues said to you. Can you
Yeah.
explain what the bigger picture is here, and how this bigger picture could have been avoided?
Uh, he probably needed to let me. The bigger picture now is that the Arab states that are in the northern part of the Arab world are all Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, are all, for all practical purposes, failed states or on the verge of being a failed state. These are countries that they were only Lebanon was sort of a democracy, but they were functioning political entities. Uh, Someplace along came the Arab awakening. This is where the difference went. And we sort of supported the Arab awakening, but we didn't. We encouraged it, but we didn't support it. And so the reaction came. It even here I blame the Europeans even more than us because the Europeans have more at stake because this part of the world is their borders on them.
You're
And
talking about the Arab Spring here, right?
talking about the Arab Spring, that
Okay.
was when I think the big mistake was made. And then second big mistake was the encouragement of Netanyahu to do what he wants. And this is, I think, was both Biden and Trump's big mistake. And then the third one was we finally reached a steady state. Uh, we Netanyahu had gained what he wanted in part, which was the ability to push around anybody in the eastern part of the Arab world. And everybody else was putting their heads down and saying yes, sir, to the Americans, even when they didn't like it. But at least there was a certain amount of, I don't want to say certain amount of stability. We were at a place where you might have been able to look at it. The Arab states in the Gulf were in good shape. This was the last part of the Arab world that was in really good shape. That was now the most important part of the Arab world, is where all the intellectuals are heading for Dubai and Qatar. They were beginning to make movies instead of Egypt. They were now making them in the UAE. So the last part of the Arab world that was stable and functioning has just been pushed over the edge.
Last thing I wanted to mention in that regard was I was talking to Professor James Gelvin a few months before this. He's done great work on the region and on the Israel-Palestine conflict history. And one thing he said was that a lot of the problems just come from a lot of Americans and people in the West not understanding the region or its people, and there's a lot of Orientalism. Do you think that does play into all of this?
Yes, I think it plays a large role. The most Americans in the Middle East are expat workers. I mean, at high level, but they're the people who work for the oil fields, or there are people who are in American universities trying to teach American values at American university. And it works. I mean, those people, but they don't really circulate. The people in the university circulate out. People in the oil fields don't circulate out, don't talk to anybody. They just see They go down to there may be a great supermarket there, but they don't really have a social circle that includes the locals. American interest in the Middle East faded a long, long time ago. Number of kids who take Arabic has been on a steady decline. Number of I'm on the advisory board of the Center for Contemporary Arab Studies in Washington at Georgetown University. It's a great center, uh, and it's good. But the people willing to fund these things are putting their money elsewhere. And I'm not talking about us, but just generally, uh, the number you're still getting students applying, but because we're a very small center, and with a lot of prestige, we get students applying, but we don't. Uh, but we couldn't take in very many anyway. But out into the larger world, uh, foreign affairs studies are going downhill, and I think Middle East foreign affairs studies are going downhill a little bit more than the others. And so, and it is a different world. It's a different world. It's very close to us, and we actually have more in common with them than we do with the Indians and the Chinese, for example. But it's still different. And I always illustrate this with Iran and the Iranian-U.S. relations. When we talk to an American about Iranian-U.S. relations and why are they so bad, he goes back to 1979 and the taking of the hostages in the embassy. When you talk to an Iranian as to why Iranian-American relations are so bad, it goes back to 1953 and the coup d'etat that overthrew the first democratically elected leader, prime minister at the time of Iran, because he was going to nationalize the British-owned petroleum company, the Anglo-Iranian Petroleum Company. So we were doing a favor to the Brits and helped overthrow the first democratically elected government of Iran. So, and you mentioned this to Americans, and I'll tell you, 9 out of every 10 Americans I speak to about Iran totally unaware of what happened in 1953.
I was going to say, I think this is even true when you talk about, and we'll end it on this after I get your thoughts on, but I think it's true with Afghanistan too. I mean, I would talk to people about Afghanistan, and they don't know what a Pashtun is or a Tajik,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
we spent how many years? 20 years and $2.3 trillion. We don't know anything about Afghanistan. And,
yeah.
we spent all that money to get the Taliban out of power, and they're back in power at the end.
Right. Exactly. So we don't teach foreign affairs very much. And I think it's the problem. I was telling people last night, we're a huge continent. We are isolated by two oceans. Our neighbors are insignificant compared to us. The two countries that we border on are economically, compared to us, economically insignificant.
Well, they're not a threat to us either, which
They're
I think
clearly
that's
not.
I
Yeah,
think that's why there's so much isolationist or non-interventionist sentiment in the
yeah,
U.S.
yeah. And you know, I can almost the part of Trump's policy that I disagree with, but at least is coherent sometimes, is we're going to be in charge of our neighborhood. We're going to impose, we're going to bring our whole neighborhood into our orbit. The objective, I understand, is going about it in the wrong way, but yeah, so that is, I think, the furthest out most Americans think. Before 9/11 and all sorts of regulations that had to go into place, uh, only about 15% of Americans owned a passport. You could go to Mexico and Canada without a passport. You could go to the Caribbean islands without a passport. You could go to Panama without a passport. So, and this was the America, the furthest out that America should be interested in the minds of the vast majority of the American people.
It's interesting that you put it that way because in a way, 9/11 and by proxy, Bin Laden, he sort of reshaped us in a weird way.
Right. But we want to go back to the way it was.
Anything you want to say in closing? What do you want my listeners to get out of this conversation? And I'll let you go.
Okay. I'm frightened because I have absolutely no idea what decisions will be made by the man in charge of our government. He's unique. He is exceptional.
I know a lot of people say he's doing the whole Nixon madman thing, but I don't even think Nixon was at this level.
No, it didn't. And you really don't want the superpower you depend on to be unpredictable.
Well, thank you again, Patrick Theros, for coming on Parallax Views.
Take care of yourself.
A special thanks to my $10 and above tier supporters on Patreon, who make this show possible with their generous donations. Producers' credits shout out to those supporters: Aaron, Fabian, Jeremy, Matt, Big Bob's Beepers, James, Enoch, David, Sadad, Tristan, Bob, Eva, Miriam, West Bank Robbery Pod, B. Lund, Transnatural Perspectives Podcast, Dan, Nick, Elliot, Fabian, Tom, Arlen, Bo, Spartacus, James, G, Jamie, Will, JC, WV, Sutra, Orc, Catherine, Darko, Nathan, Holland, Dan, Mark, Chase, Olm, Gary, Emilia, Nick, Brace, Michael, and Brian. Please join those listeners in supporting me at the $10 and above tier of my Patreon page, patreon.com/Parallax Views, if you'd like your very own producer's credit on each and every edition of the program. Until next time, you've been listening to Parallax Views with Parallax Views to Parallax Views with Parallax Views.
The way out is not simply to say don't do it, just to prohibit. It's nothing else. If we don't do it, others will be doing it like crazy. So, we have to confront the problem. But no, basically, I know of the great anxieties, problems, new forms of control, but it's also new forms of freedom. This is why I always emphasize that internet and all this new digital stuff, it's a very ambiguous phenomenon, but it's the field of struggle. New forms of enslavement, but at the same time, new incredible forms of freedom. We have to accept the fight with no nostalgia for old, allegedly more authentic communities or whatever. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid.